Jenni's going to come talk about religion and games now.
Yes.
I hope that wasn't too awful with me just talking like forever. Just finally, when we talk about Ubisoft franchises, please can you remember that Splinter Cell and Rainbow Six are still good games. They're not part of this iterative bollocks. They're really good. And talk about me next time. Are you ready?
Yes. Can we get rid of the terrifying picture?
I wouldn't say it was terrifying, but it's long now if you can't stand here. Give it up for Jenni, everybody.
So I'm going to be talking about something kind of completely different to what everyone else talked about. Okay. I should probably introduce myself a bit. I'm Jenni. I don't really do much involving games, to be honest. I did a degree in philosophy and theology, entirely by accident, because I wanted to do a degree in philosophy. They don't let you do that without doing the subject. And then I realised that religion was cool and everyone should talk about it all the time. And now I'm doing an MA in religious studies. Basically, games are I don't want to say all games ever are really shallow, but a lot of games are really shallow. And when I'm talking about games, I'm mostly meaning sort of your big AAA kind of titles. Because there are always some that are doing some really interesting things, but you know, trends and stuff. Generally, they don't deal with things in depth very well. So they kind of have this veneer of wanting to appear to deal with difficult concepts, but then it's all kind of for show, and if you dig a little deeper, there's not really any foundations behind it. And a really big offender for this is the way most games deal with religion. So there's a few things I'm going to bring up. Mostly that we don't really engage with how games deal with religion at the moment very well. There's a few sites, whenever anybody gets recommendations on this sort of thing, people recommend Game Church, Christ and Pop Culture, and I think there's one called Video Games in the Bible that I came across. And all three of these have something in common, and it's that they're talking about it for a ministry purpose. So they're not really interested in talking about it kind of in the more academic sense of what is this game doing with religion, how is it using it in its narrative, what is the point of what it's doing. They're very much more about what can games show us, how can we use games to teach religion. For instance, Game Church they go to conventions and they have a stall and they hand out stuff, and that includes Bibles. So it's very clear that their way of engaging with games is partially because they want to win over an audience. And that's not what I'm interested in when it comes to religion and games. I mean, it's good that some people might see them as a tool for that. I mean, I definitely think it's a sign that video games have kind of arrived as a cultural standpoint, because if people want to convert you using them, that means they're kind of popular. But it's probably not that great. The other thing is, a lot of people when they think of religious games think of really, really terrible games. Like, I don't know if anyone saw the Call of Abraham Kickstarter. I followed it mostly out of morbid curiosity. It was terrible. But they were like, oh, we want to do this realistic Bible simulator. And I was like, okay, what era? And they're like, oh, you know, you're going to be one of the followers of Abraham as he travels nomadically through the desert. That's so dull. And there are so many more cool aspects of the Bible they could have picked that would have been really, really interesting. But they were going for it for the sense of, oh, we want to show the Bible as this awesome thing and persuade people that they should believe in this, rather than, hey, do you know what's a really cool source of story? I mean, a really good example, if any of you have seen the film Noah, it's got a lot of flaws, but what Noah does is it mythologizes the story of Noah in a way that we don't usually do with Christian religion. And that would be way more interesting than the Call of Abraham. What was great about the Call of Abraham is it completely fell apart. I watched the whole thing. It was absolutely fantastic to watch. Mostly because, yeah, getting a bunch of fundamentalist guys who don't really know what they're doing with video games to make video games, never going to work. Just ever. So yeah, that's kind of how we engage with it. The problem then, of course, is that video games don't really want to engage with religion on a deep and culturally important sense. There's a few things that I would put this down to, and this will be the only time that I'm going to mention that horrific hashtag. But it's kind of cemented this idea that I've been thinking about for a while. A lot of people think of games as a technology product. I mean, you see this in the way this hashtag sort of talks about, they want reviews that talk about the features, not about the culture and societal context. They want just to know, is it good? Does it run well? Has it got a good frame rate? And that, you know, it's fine that some people engage with games in that sense, but that's kind of not what they are. But this kind of feeds into the idea that a lot of people think of games as a science and technology thing. they kind of think of it as separate to the humanities and the arts. I've certainly had the past 3 months of people telling me the arts are completely worthless, which obviously we've seen tonight is completely untrue, because narrative is really important even if you don't think about it. But for all the people who hate the humanities, if there's one humanity they hate the most, it's definitely religious studies. They really do not like us. We don't get any money, unlike certain people who apparently get grants to talk about anything they want, even if they fail. I can't get that if I try. But like, there's a lot of, oh, it's fairy stories, oh, it's not important. And ignoring that as well, obviously, you'll find in a lot of more sciencey tech communities, there's a lot of atheists, and that's great. Unless they're the kind of atheists who think religion is stupid and we should never talk about it and it's got no relevance whatsoever. Because even if you think religion is bad, even if you think it's flawed, even if you think we would be better off without its existence, you can't say it's unimportant. Because the point that we're at today wouldn't exist without it, and we can't have conversations regarding it or anything without acknowledging its influence. So that's kind of where we're at to start with. I'm not very organised, I didn't have like a PowerPoint or anything. So yeah. Basically, some games deal with religion pretty well, and some deal with it terribly, but none of them really deal with it in sort of innovative ways that they could do. So I'll start with a good example to be positive. I haven't played Dragon Age Inquisition at all because I don't own it yet, so please don't tell me anything about it. I'm going to talk about the Dragon Age. Basically, Dragon Age does some really interesting things despite it being a very standard fantasy fair religion. The Chantry, particularly, is a very, very clear sort of attempt at recreating, but making it different, the Catholic Church. You've got your prophet who dies, you've got kind of the god above that, you've got the order that's only allowed to be one gender because that's what the prophet was, except they swap the genders around just to be interesting. You've even got like interesting schisms in the law, so you find that I think it's the Imperial Chantry want to say that Andraste, oh, she wasn't really holy, she was just a very powerful mage. And the Andrastians are just like, oh no, she was actually holy, she was actually, you know, that did happen in the early church. People thought about whether Jesus was actually a prophet or whether he was actually divine. So whoever wrote this really did understand what they were doing. Unfortunately, it kind of fails a little bit in that it doesn't really go as far as it could do. Because if there's one thing most, I'm going to say monotheistic religions, because it's a little different when you get pantheons, most of them have a male creator, major god figure. And unsurprisingly, this is almost certainly because the people who like to write religious things are usually men. And, you know, what's better than seeing yourself as the, it's a man who made all the world. But where Dragon Age has this opportunity, they have a major female prophet, an entire female order, their creator god is still male. For basically no reason. It's not justified. It's just, oh yeah, the maker, oh yeah, he's a dude. Yeah, Andraste married him, that's why she's like a prophet. Great, what? And you can kind of tell that what they're doing here is they're kind of going, we need to have a religion. Let's try and do something interesting. And they've done all the work, they've done all the research, but they haven't thought, what can we change? What can we push further? Of course, this is in a very, well, it's favourably compared to Skyrim, which I'm really sorry if anyone finds the religion in Skyrim interesting, but I actually just hate it. For the same reason I hate the Game of Thrones religions. They're so shallow and so badly done. It feels like what people have done is they've gone, hey, we're doing a fantasy setting, and it's sort of like medieval. Yeah, people believed in gods then. Well, they're kind of like Vikings, so, oh, well, the Vikings had multiple gods, like a pantheon. Yeah, let's make a pantheon. And then they went, okay, well, we should probably have a god of life, a god of death. What else is there? Oh, there's probably a god of child. You know, they kind of just went through the motions and stuck them in, and then kind of, that was it. And there's nothing to it. So I think an important thing to acknowledge here is that, like, you kind of find that these religions don't feel like religions because who would believe that? Like, why do people believe this stuff? You wander around Skyrim and you meet all these people in these temples and they're all like, oh yes, we worship this person. You're like, why? I don't know anything about this god. Beyond the fact that vaguely, oh, like this one's the god of death. Okay, great. Anything else you can tell me? And there's very little. I mean, sure, if you go and read all the lore in the extra books, you might find out a few extra things, but the onus shouldn't be on you to go and do the research into why this is a believable thing. It should, if you're having it in the narrative, it really needs to be a thing that makes sense to be in the narrative, not just, crap, we needed a god because, well, Vikings. which is definitely what they've done. I'm going to look at another game which is very different in how it deals with gods, but I think it's a really good example of how you can use a religion in a really minor sense to give a whole bunch of world building. Has anyone recently been playing Civilization Beyond Earth?
Yeah.
Okay, so for all its flaws, and it does happen, it's got some really interesting things, which I'm going to have to read out if I can read my handwriting at this point. So basically, if you follow sort of the harmony path, you get one sort of tone of religion. And if you follow purity, you'll get another. So sort of in the harmony path, you have, when you research into genetic design, you get, do you change the steps in the dance of life, or does the dance of life change yours? I can't pronounce this, so don't laugh at me. This is from the Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, and it gives you the reference. Later on, when you research orbital networks, you get Seraphim, Cherubim, Devas, Frakashi, and Yakash. Extend thy arms to cover us, hear us and convey our prayers to the Lord Creator. From daily devotionals for comms operators. And then when you go to the purity track, you get a completely different vibe. So you get things like, we thrive because we built a solid foundation on this world, with values brought from Earth, by Esther Polymather, collected sermons. Or, we remake this world into a new Eden. Should a serpent enter it and whisper words that lead to ruin, let us then become the rectifying archangel with a fiery sword. So these don't really affect anything. They're no way in it as much as, say, Skyrim's gods, but you instantly have much more of a concept of what the people you're dealing with believe. Like in Skyrim, if someone said to me, hey, you know, what beliefs do these people have in their religion? Like, what rituals might they have? What sort of moral systems might they have? What interests do they do? How do they interact with other religions? I couldn't tell you, because I just kind of know, well, these ones like this one because it heals people sometimes. Whereas in Beyond Earth, I know if you follow the harmony track, you're looking into the sort of pantheism, the sort of God in everything kind of religion. I know that that means they're going to be living in harmony with nature. They're probably going to be very tolerant of other people, unless those people are intent on destroying them or wiping out diversity. I also know that with the purity track, it's very much American fundamentalism. It's, we are the best. Why should we change? This should change for us. We are superior. It's very much reading into Genesis, the idea of I give you dominion over the earth to literally mean dominion in the sense of own and take control and do what you want, not dominion as in careful. And that's great because from literally like 4 different quotes, I can tell you all about these cultures, and it gives you this sense of world building that Skyrim just doesn't even tackle. Of course, there are some problems with Beyond Earth, and one big one is kind of a really big problem with how games deal with religion at the moment. There's very much a sense of exoticism when we're looking at religions that aren't Abrahamic in origin. So by Abrahamic, that's the 3 kind of major ones that came out of Abraham: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And they all kind of come from Abraham and they kind of schism off at different points. Non-Abrahamic religions are basically everything else. The big ones that most people will refer to are Hinduism and Buddhism and occasionally Sikhism, but that one's a little tricky because it's born out of Islam in some ways. What you'll find is there was a trend in about, I want to say the 70s, it might have been the 60s, where science fiction started to take on this idea of like the East as some ethereal, mystic place. Where you get all of these sci-fi books by like Zelzani, who wrote something using Buddhism as a plot point. And there's very much this kind of othering sense of, oh, there's some deep spiritual truth in the East that we don't have access to. And games are at that point currently. Sci-fi's kind of got over that hump, and not all the time, but it's getting better. Whereas games are currently at the point where it's like, oh, we need some kind of, you know, spiritual, oh, let's go with like monks and Buddhist style religion, that's what we're doing. And when they want to convey something otherwise, something more conservative and close to home, they go, oh yeah, Abrahamic stuff. And that's a really simplified version, and it's also not really great when you want to be dealing with race, because obviously there is a racial aspect to religion, and the more you kind of exoticize Hindu, Buddhism, and all of these, the more you make it harder to engage them as main characters, because they're kind of meant to be this special mystic thing, not, you know, your ordinary everybody that the main protagonists relate to. So that's kind of an issue with the whole othering and the exoticism thing. The final thing I'll go into is kind of how you can probably improve this if you're interested in writing religion and anything. And it's really, really not hard. You don't need to do a lot of research at all. Because the whole thing with, I mean, unless you're going with a real world game, then you should definitely do the research. But if you're doing like a fantasy or sci-fi thing, you've got so much room to innovate. There's no need for you to go with, like I said, a male god. Why would you do that? There's a really good piece online, which I'm going to get Jake to link to when he records this, by Catherine Cross, and it talks about how, it's about tabletop games, but it talks about how the gods in Pathfinder allowed her to explore aspects of religion that she didn't know existed. So you have, there's a genderless god, whose followers actually spend time throughout their lives experimenting with different gender roles. Sometimes they dress in one way, sometimes in another, sometimes they take on certain aspects. And then when they've reached a certain point at which they're happy, they choose which role they want to be in. And that's really cool, and games give you the option to think about religion as this kind of tool and to do this kind of thing. A really important point is that, that Tim brought up earlier when I was talking about this in the car on the way down, because I'm very organised, was that you kind of have a problem in games that their gods are a bit more real. And I don't mean that, like, then, you know, no offense to anybody who believes in anything, I don't mean like in the sense they're not real here. I mean in the sense that you literally encounter them. And not in the sense of a voice in your head, and not in the sense of that kind of thing, but in the sense like sometimes they just appear and do stuff. And it's kind of hard to believe in a god like that, because you know that god exists, and that kind of gets away from the idea of belief. But the way most games deal with this is they kind of just have it being like, there's a god, what are you gonna do? Cool. This is not how anybody would react, like, ever. I mean, if kind of Superman appeared right now, your reaction would be, okay. It would be, holy shit. Like, nobody reacts like this. There's a really good quote by Terry Pratchett, who actually, if you want to read interesting takes on fantasy and religion, read some Terry Pratchett, especially Small Gods. It's from Cart Jugular. Granny Weatherwax is kind of talking about if she'd seen the god on the priest, how she would react. And it's, if I thought there was some god who really did care about people, you wouldn't find me just being generally nice in the hope that it'll all be alright in the end. That's what true faith would mean, sacrificing your own life one day at a time to the flame, declaring the truth of it, working for it, breathing the soul of it. That's religion. Anything else is just being nice. So in a world where, like, you know your gods exist, why don't we see more people being that extreme? This is one aspect you could take if you wanted to really make it interesting. Another point I've had raised is how do you doubt? You know, if you know your god exists, you say, hey God, I want to cast a miracle right now, and the miracle happens. How do you doubt in a world where that happens? And the thing is, it's very simple. You can doubt why God is choosing you over choosing literally anybody else. Why there are people dying in the streets while you can, for some bizarre reason, heal this kind of dickhead of a friend that you've got. It seems a little unfair. You can doubt sort of whether or not actually this is a good god that's giving you these powers. I mean, you're murdering a lot of people right now, and we're still kind of happy with you, and that might be our problem. So there's all these kind of aspects that games don't deal with. If I had to pick, sort of following on from like Michael Cook's idea of one thing I'd love to see, is that there's a system called Savage Worlds for a tabletop role-playing game, which is a really nice way of making you do stuff. I played a nun in Deadlands because I like that, and she had some super cool holy powers. It was amazing, but she had rules that she had to follow to keep these, because hey, gods give you moral codes for a reason. She may have broke them by blowing up an entire factory filled with people at one point, and she lost her powers, because that's how, it works. So at the moment, the way games work that give you kind of these, holy powers and spells, there's no consequences for anything you do. You just kind of blast things with your holy fire, it was an innocent, oh well. That's really not great, unless you're following a god of death, in which case maybe it's okay, but we should probably explain that. So I'd love to see a game where you actually have consequences for following a religion. You don't just get these powers scot-free. You kind of have to deal with them. You can't kill innocents. Great, go and have fun not murdering everyone in the city this time, or you don't get the special murder powers. And that's kind of really important. So that's kind of the main overview I've got. I think I'm probably running a bit out of time, but Jake's not saying
In that way, it's like, you can talk a bit more, but like 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah.
This is why he's put me last, I should say. So yeah, some other things that you should probably bear in mind. And these are kind of entirely ripped off from a talk somebody else gave at 9 Worlds, and they were awesome. But I organised it so I can steal it. Basically, and he's not on Twitter or anything, so I can't even credit him, which is really hard. If you want to include a religion in a game, your process, it's kind of like writing. You know how you always hear the way games add in the narratives? Is they're like, oh, well, we made this game, can you put a story on it? And you're like, no, that's not how writing works. Rob is looking at like, yes, that's how it works. Like, you don't just give a bunch of scenes and then tie them together, except you do in games, but it's hard. People do that with religion, with the narrative. They kind of like, they write this whole thing and they go, oh, crap, religion! And they kind of just try and shove it in, and that's not how religion works. The better way to do it is to work out, why do you want a religion in your game? Is it there because you feel like, Vikings have religions, I should put one in? That's a bad reason, don't do that. Is it there because you think you could do some really interesting moral questions with it? In which case, yes, go to town with it. But build it from the ground up. So instead of thinking, okay, I've got this kind of group of monks, and I want them to be vaguely spiritual, oh, look at Hinduism. Yeah. What you should do instead is think, well, you know, what kind of things do these people believe? Well, they believe kind of in the sanctity of all life. Well, why might they might believe therefore that God is in everything, because why would they not believe that? What kind of rituals might one do if one holds that belief? So if I believe that, you know, in a god of light of some kind, that's a pretty common one, what kind of rituals might I expect? I might expect rituals that involve having a whole, like Diwali basically. So the whole candles everywhere, and beautiful colours, all decorated in light. And I would expect to see that reflected in their location site. I was asking whether The Witcher has a religion in it. I was told, I don't know, but it's got monks in it. That should never be the answer to having religions in your game. If you know there are monks, but you don't know anything about why they're monks, that's a really, really bad way of writing a religion. Like, much as you may disagree with religions, you tend to know why people are religious. Like, if I see a nun, I can say, oh, they're a Christian, because they're a nun. Nuns are Christian. Christian faith involves this things. I don't just think, oh, yeah, look, a religious person. Ah, religion, it exists. That's terrible. So don't do that, basically. I think that's the majority of my points. Oh, I was going to bring up a really nice example of a story that I haven't seen done in games, and then I'm going to stop. Again, with the doubt thing that I mentioned earlier, a really interesting, and it's a very key story in Abrahamic faith, and I've never seen games deal with it, but then again, they don't deal with a lot of cultural kind of core things, is that you can have a god that you believe is perfectly moral. You can have a god that you know exists, and you've had physical proof that this god exists. And you can wholly doubt the actions this god wants you to do. And this is a really big question. Like, you know this supernatural being that can literally smite you if it gets bored exists. And you know it's asking you to do this act, but your moral code doesn't match up with the gods at this point. What do you do? This comes from like Abraham and Isaac. Basically, you know, God asked Abraham, go and kill your son. And Abraham had to go, do I go and do that? Abraham did. Well, he didn't kill him, but he made the choice to. It would be bad if he killed him. But that's a choice you can put in, and that's the thing. Games don't deal with any of the big questions that religion raises. They don't look at it and go, ooh, we could use this religion to explore all of this cool stuff. They go, Vikings! And then that's then sorted. So yeah, shall I ask for questions, or shall I be good and be quiet?
I mean, let's see how many questions come up. And like 1 or 2.
Yeah, okay.
Oh God, so many!
Because I know you in corruption!
I was just going to ask, what do you think about how gameplay mechanics are almost always tied to the gods in games?
I think they're not actually as tied to it as people think. It's very arbitrary. Like, I've very rarely seen a mechanic that makes me think that I understand why that mechanic is linked to that certain god, if that makes sense. Like, it seems to be very much, I'm going to go with tabletop, because I know tabletop a bit more, but in Savage Worlds, say, if you follow the Battle Lord in a certain thing, you know, you get these superpowers that let you stab things. But it's very much that order. Is I want to stab things harder, so I'm going to follow this god so I can stab more things, rather than I follow this god, therefore this mechanic. It's very much a backwards way around, I think. At the back.
So just a couple of games I'm interested in your thoughts on. Bioshock Infinite, because of its possibly ham-fisted text.
So many.
And Binding of Isaac.
Binding of Isaac scares me. Binding of Isaac does a lot of really interesting things. Even if I don't like how it deals with a lot of things, I love that it chooses to go with those kind of key cultural concepts as a way of telling a story. That's the thing a lot of games really don't bother with. It's kind of lazy. They just like cut off this whole area of like human experience because they don't want to deal with it. Whereas Binding of Isaac kind of says, no, these are really interesting key things that everyone's going to recognize if they've grown up in these sort of countries. Yeah, let's use them, and I like that. Bioshock Infinite, I have a lot of feelings about Bioshock Infinite. Most people have a lot of feelings about Bioshock Infinite. I was so excited for the first 5 minutes where you kind of go in through the chapel and everything's beautiful and there's this gorgeous, gorgeous music in the background and it feels like they really understand what they're doing, and then it stops, basically. Again, nobody on that weird Sky Island feels like they actually have a reason to be that extremely up there. Like, if you're going to be on some kind of floating Sky Island because, God, you really need to be quite an extreme believer. And they just aren't, except for like the main guy, and he's a manipulator. But like everyone else is just kind of like, oh yeah, religion. No, you wouldn't get me on a crazy Sky Island in a really passive Protestant sense of the word. Like, you really have to be going for your key very. I'd expect to see the very evangelical American sense of sort of people speaking in tongues and all this, and people prophesizing in the streets. That's what I expect from Bioshock Infinite, because why would you get on there if not? So it was more disappointment. I like that they tried, and yeah, again, they picked up on this concept, but they just, again, it felt like they were going, oh yes, religion, that's a bad thing, we should highlight that, rather than thinking about it.
You're kind of, my general feeling with your talk seemed to be that a lot of the time games are going to move towards using mythology as, using religion as like theology and putting character there rather than liturgy. How can we move that way? Because that sounds more interesting.
I think it would take a bit of a cultural shift in the kind of people we have making games, or the kind of attitudes we have in those people, because as I said, I think there's a distrust and a disinterest in religion. There's kind of a distrust for obvious reasons, like, I'm probably technically a heretic if you ask anybody, but most theologian types are. But yeah, I study religion. I find it fascinating. But oh god, there are so many reasons to distrust it. And as for the disinterest, I think it's this kind of idea that we're beyond it now. Like the idea that we don't need it. There's science and that can take its place, which is kind of silly. Yeah, I'm gonna get so angry with me for that. But I think it would take a bit of a shift in how we view religion to move that, rather than anything more. Because until people start to view it, I'd be happy with people viewing it in an anthropological sense, in a sort of, it's an important part of human experience, it's an important part of the culture we have, and it should definitely be talked about. You don't need to think it's good, you just need to know it exists. But I think we have a lot of developers choosing just to kind of not deal with it. And given how America tends to react to criticisms of religion as a whole, I can see why. Someone who recommended me a game on Twitter, which I haven't played, called Xenogears, which apparently America got really angry about it because it used a lot of Gnostic ideas, which is why I want to play it, because I like that. But apparently they got really, really annoyed about it and weren't happy with it. So I can see why, a lot of people might not want to risk doing interesting things with religion when, the Western market might look at you and go, why have you done that?
I'm going to pick you up and
Yes.
carry you off stage. We should clap while you like.